This video is sponsored by Crimson Manifesto and Knuckles OX. Hey, real quick before we begin, don't forget to go ahead and leave a like to help me out, as well as to make sure you've gone ahead and subscribed so you don't miss my future uploads. Tracing the steps of the future Pirate King. What if Rob Lucci and CP9 became pirates Part 3? Even recognizing that he is not only outnumbered, but more than likely outgunned, Who's grudge against Shanks for taking everything from him refuses to let him back down. However, Shanks doesn't even know who he is, and that is the last straw as the Zone user retakes his hybrid form, and digs his claws into the ship's deck preparing to pounce once again. However, just before Batman can make good on his earlier threat, Shanks tells him not to bother, somewhat stumbling to his feet in the midst of what seems like a lingering hangover, muttering obscenities about the sunlight, white beard, and something about Kaido. Hearing his boss's name leave the sneaky wretch's lips, Who snarls, hesitating only because of the shared title of Yonko, and what his actions could mean for the Beast Pirates. But in the end, reasoning Kaido would forgive him if he were at least mildly successful, takes his shot at the one-armed Emperor, by firing off the strongest fang pistol he could, pouring every bit of his willpower and killing intent into it. Even so, Shanks simply tilts his head lazily to avoid it, as if he'd been expecting it for weeks now, stepping forward just as confidently as a cold sweat drips down the cat's forehead, as he's forced to recognize his title was well earned, and thus bows his head in submission, begging for forgiveness. Shanks grunts that he's getting tired of people being violent hotheads all the time, revealing that he's just returning from a run-in with Kaido, where it took all his liver could take to drink the Dragon Emperor into being entertained enough to be talked out of what sounded like an exciting war, stating it was only because they settled the issue peacefully that he was not retaliated, and suggesting the member of Kaido's crew stay better up to date. At this, Who's becomes defensive, blaming the entire coincidental encounter on Lucci, whom Shanks only now remembers also crashed on the deck of his ship, looking down to see the cooler-headed former government assassin carefully watching everything after having awoken, while Lucci, Hattori, or anyone else in the world don't remember his crew due to Sugar's abilities. Blue Note's message and Hattori's final actions, such as getting the two of them out of Dressrosa, are still fresh in the well-trained duo's mind, as Blue Note had carefully tailored his instructions like basic mission parameters they would use for training as far back as their days on Guanghao Island. This mission had 3 objectives: re-infiltrate the Kingdom of Dressrosa after attaining greater strength, reclaim a precious item that has been lost to you, and escape Dressrosa alive. However, this task came with no greater parameters, such as a time frame or the point of entry for said re-infiltration. And what's more, Lucci still isn't so sure how he even made it out of Doflamingo's clutches when he couldn't even defeat Who's Who, or the members of the Doflamingo family who he remembers were doing something. Nonetheless, it is abundantly clear that he will not be beginning this infiltration today, as not only are his wounds far too severe to lay siege to a kingdom, but the Red Force is sailing in the complete opposite direction, leaving him trapped on board lest he fall prey to the shared weakness of all Devil Fruit users. However, now is not the time for such thoughts, as with an uncharacteristically friendly smile for a Yonko, Red Hair makes his way over to Lucci, asking if he or his combative contemporary would care to give him an explanation of their arrival. Still eyeing Shanks like an assassination target, Lucci gives the man a terse rundown of the events as he remembers them, saying that he came to Dressrosa to grow stronger for his ultimate goal of getting revenge against the future Pirate King, the world government, and especially one particular little rat named Spondum. Here at least, Who's Who agrees with Lucci, remembering the purple-haired wretch as the one who had him in prison after Shanks stole the Hito no Mi Maronika from him. He'd always liked the idea of ending Spondum himself, but if this kitten wants to do all the legwork, then he won't stop him, since no matter who dies, it would be a win for him. Unfortunately, all smugness fades from Who's demeanor when Shanks next asks what about him, causing the Sabretooth to realize that after ruining his life, Red Hair really doesn't even know who he is. Scowling, he explains that he is one of Kaido's top men, here on business for the Dragon Emperor, and that he's sure his boss would be appreciative if they brought him back to Wano. However, with a shake of his head, Ben Beckman calls this impossible, pointing out they're heading in the opposite direction, and that their current objective is too time critical for any detours or delays. Nodding, Shanks adds that while Beck is right, he thinks he has a proposition that might appeal to everyone. It's plain to see that their 2 guests are powerful, so if they lend their strength to him in stopping the upcoming war at Marineford, then he'll help them out. Plus, he's curious to hear about Luffy's grandest battle to date from Lucci's perspective. Being spoken down to him this way enrages Who's Who, with him letting out a guttural snarl, more in keeping with his hybrid form. Though like with his unsuccessful attack, the one-armed Yonko remains unfazed, saying that he's welcome to try and get back to Wano by lifeboat if he wants, but for a man whose past is rooted in the gathering of intelligence, he'd have thought Who's Who would gather this is not an intelligent plan, causing the ancient cat man to get excited that he does remember him, only for Shanks to again tilt his head and say that he lost it. Lucci, meanwhile, has no objections, seeing the wisdom and studying at the feet of a Yonko even for a short time, just as he learned the tricks of his former trade from the old assassins of Guanghao. And while he's loath to recall his loss of Straw Hat, he knows in that failure must lie the same strength that allowed that boy to get back up endlessly. And so it is that Rob Lucci, the killing machine, captain of a crew he cannot recall, begins his new life as red-haired Shanks' temporary cabin boy. Who's Who in his prideful way initially rebuffs such a station, citing his power as being far too high for such drudgery, though this is promptly put to bed when Yasop starts spraying him in the face with a squirt bottle each time he talks back, clearly unafraid of the Toby Ropo. At night, when their duties are done, Shanks does make good on his promise to help the pair of ex-assassins, lightly training with them and acting as a mentor for Lucci's growing observation hockey proficiency, and even encouraging that if the newly minted pirate keeps pushing and forging his own path, he'll someday reach the caliber to hunt prey like him, the prospect of which only redoubles Lucci's resolve. Even here, Who's Who is difficult, as he mostly uses these training sessions as a chance to kill Shanks for his perceived wrongs. This is obviously unsuccessful, though it always leaves the senior beast pirate exhausted and listless the following day, meaning Lucci has to pick up his slack when they return to work. The only things that don't seem to make Who's Who miserable are the occasional games of cards he plays with Red Hair's commanders, being something of a prolific gambler, and the even more occasional instance where he can swallow his pride long enough to ask about some sun god Lucci's never heard of. However, this line of questioning seldom achieves much, as the most he gets from the tight-lipped crew are vague acknowledgments that they heard of this Nika. Shanks himself even burst out laughing when asked directly about the deity, in a way that makes Lucci think of the tales told of the previous Pirate King, though this is hardly surprising considering he was the man who raised the one-armed Yonko. Finally, after several weeks of sailing, the fated day arrives, as the Red Force passes through the strangely open gates of justice. How bizarre. Last time he saw these gates, Lucci was a world government stooge locked in a battle with a pirate. Now he's returning as a pirate himself, with the express purpose to stop a battle between pirates and marines. But one thing has not changed, and that is the fact that Rob Lucci is a consummate professional who will get the job done. To this end, he remains on board the ship as Shanks and Beckman go ahead, seemingly having seen something thanks to advanced observation hawk. However, these two are not the only ones to witness a notable sight, as when the frozen battlefield of Marineford comes into view, Lucci bears witness to a familiar face of his own, Straw Hats. Lucci has no idea what the young man is doing here, though presently he is out for the count, looking even worse than he did in the closing moments of their fight, a serious chest wound now emblazing his skin. Bitterly, Lucci wonders if this will be the end of Straw Hat, cursing whoever did this to him not out of any fondness for the boy, but rather because if Straw Hat dies, he'll be deprived of one of his new core goals. Scowl curling his lips, Lucci scans around for the culprit, figuring that if he can't have Straw Hat, maybe he can at least entertain himself with his killer, since if he's learned anything from fighting that persistent little bastard, it's that whoever gave him that scar must be a fighter of some skill. By doing so, Lucci quickly discovers what Shanks is doing, as at that moment, Red Hair is locked in combat with Marine Admiral Akainu, seemingly in an attempt to shield a young Marine who lies at the Yonko's feet. Meanwhile, Beckman, never one to be outdone by his captain, is holding Admiral Kizaru at gunpoint, thus allowing some brat with sideburns and a goatee to load Straw Hat onto his ship. Briefly, Lucci even considers employing his Rokushiki to sink the ship, and Straw Hat with it, giving credence to the idea that a leopard never changes his spots. Though this is only a fleeting thought, as while easily doable, there will be no value to killing Straw Hat as he is now. Either he will die here, proving he wasn't worth getting worked up over in the first place, or he will survive, and Lucci will kill him then. However, before he can give this any more thought, he is tapped on the shoulder by Lucky Root, whom in a laid-back way reminds him of the deal he and Who's Who have with Shanks. Nodding curtly, the two Catmen shift into their hybrid form, so that they can cut the most intimidating figures possible as they join the rest of Red Hair's crew on the ice. The plan is a simple one: exude a scene of overwhelming power to force both sides to stop fighting. This is something the two former Cypherpole agents can easily do, as with death glares written across their faces, they both eye off pirates and marines alike, as if daring each and every one of them to make a move and give them an excuse to unsheath their claws and show off what they have learned under Red Hair's tutelage. Wisely, no one moves, with the only ones to speak being Shanks, Fleet Admiral Sengoku, and the man known as Blackbeard. Having a force of less than a dozen, Blackbeard is the first to withdraw, giggling maniacally as he goes, though his is the only expression of joy, as when Shanks and Sengoku lock eyes, it is with an air of the utmost seriousness. Frankly, Shanks tells Sengoku to call an end to the fighting, as he's the sole surviving leader, an order the Fleet Admiral is more than willing to obey, declaring that the war is over. And just like that, an unseen spell is broken, as before were warriors desperately fighting for their vision of the future, become men and women once again, tending to their wounded, counting their dead. No one seems to see Marine or pirate anymore, merely people who, for better or worse, have made their mark on history. Lucci watches all this coldly, feeling nothing for either side, his only concern being his deal with Shanks, a deal which seems to now be complete. Approaching the pair of Catmen, the uncle confirms this, thanking them both for their help and bidding them good luck in their endeavors. Huffily, Who's Who asks if this means Red Hair will be taking him back to Wano now, though with a chuckle, Shanks answers that he can tag along with him if he wishes, and maybe they'll swing back by the isolated nation sooner or later. But for now, he and his crew have other business to attend to first, such as burying Ace and Whitebeard, along with visiting a certain island near the start of the Grand Line. Scowl only deepening, Who's Who snarls that he doesn't have time for all that, while Lucci declares that he's not going to be hanging around either, as he has a job to complete. Rounding on the younger cat, Who's Who declares that he will join him, at least until they come across a port. to which Lucci gruffly replies he can do whatever he wants, though he should keep in mind he's a lot stronger and better with observation hockey than he was during their first fight. So if the Tobiropo tries anything funny, he will skin him and make him into a coat. For a moment, the two jungle cats glare at each other, though this is short-lived, as by now the pirates are beginning to depart en masse, and if the two former Cypherpole agents want away off the island that isn't the brig of a marine ship, they will have to follow suit. Stowing away with one of Whitebeard's defeated allies, Lucci and Who's Who soon find themselves stopping off at Logtown of all places, and so disembark, just as stealthily as they had boarded, glad to be able to get on with their individual plans. However, before they can truly part ways, they will need resources for their respective missions. To this end, the pair conduct one last action as allies, breaking into a nearby house, and after dispatching of the inhabitants with finger pistols, take what they need. For Lucci, these are supplies that he can use or sell to get back to Dressrosa, while for Who's Who, it's a Din Din Mushi, as he is at last able to put in the call he's been longing to since the moment he landed on Red-Hair's deck. Picking up on the first ring, the rumbling voice of Kaido drunkenly demands to know who's calling him, though with a predatory grin to his tone, Who's Who reveals himself. This pleases the Dragon Emperor, as he had assumed that his subordinate was dead due to what Queen said, though he does question why it has taken Who's Who so long to report in. Looking to ingratiate himself with his volatile boss so that he does not wind up on the receiving end of a Thunder Bagara, the Saber-Tooth recounts the events since his departure from Wano, making sure to paint Queen in the least favorable light possible, and thus leave the blame for his absence at the fat man's feet. Even if, truthfully, he still has no idea where that hole came from. However, Kaido has only limited interest in this politicking, instead paying greater attention to the exploits of Rob Lucci, who he instructs Who's Who to put on the phone. Taciturn as ever, Lucci inquires what Kaido wants with him, though in a bout of apparent generosity, the Emperor answers that he could see the two of them being useful to one another, stating that he's always been good at making friends, and so would like to extend the olive branch of friendship to the CP9 deserter, by offering him refuge in Wano should he ever need a safe harbor. Though Lucci has no desire to be around Who's Who for a moment longer after witnessing the power of him and Queen, he cannot deny that training among pirates of their caliber would likely give him the strength he needs to complete his mission back on Dressrosa. And so with a terse grunt, he replies that he will meet Kaido as soon as he is able to receive him. Letting out a thunderous laugh, Kaido informs the ex-assassin that one of his ships is in the area, and should be able to reach Logtown by nightfall, meaning they'll be able to meet quite soon. Acknowledging this, Lucci tosses the snail's receiver back to Who's Who, then heads off into town, as he'd like to make a couple preparations before he meets an Emperor of the Sea, particularly one with a far more ruthless reputation than Red-Haired Shanks. When he is gone, Kaido asks if Who's Who has anything else to report, and with another predatory grin curling his face, the top cat of the Tobiropo says that he has a request of all things. He wants to challenge Queen for his spot amongst the All-Stars. He's way stronger than that fat oaf, and would be a far more reliable left hand to the only rightful contender for the title of Pirate King. Though Kaido thinks little of this flattery, he is intrigued by the prospect of a fight between his wildcat and the funky scientist, and with this in mind, tells Who's Who that very well, if he desires a shot at the top, he may have it when he returns to Wano, though he should be very sure that he's ready, as they both know that Queen will not relinquish his position without a fight. Meanwhile, out in the streets of Logtown, Lucci's attempt to make preparations for the trip to Wano has been somewhat hampered by a gathering of the town square. As it turns out that the Marines have begun a crackdown on piracy following their less than stellar performance in the Paramount War, with public executions becoming a more common occurrence meant to show that the world government is still as powerful as ever. Lucci can't help but scoff at how amateurish this all is. If one feels they need to declare that they have power, then simply put, they do not, as power is self-evident, and evidently these fools do not have it. Surveying the pair of poor bastards set to die today, Lucci recognizes them as Don Krieg, Admiral of the Krieg Pirates, and Sawtooth Arlong, Captain of the Arlong Pirates. To him, they are nothing but small fries, but by East Blue standard, they might as well be Yonko, so he can see why the people of Logtown are excited. He can also see a use for both of them, as if he is to present himself to Kaido as a pirate worthy of his attention, he will require a crew to stand behind him, and most importantly, to watch his back in the Dragon's Den and beyond. Truthfully, Lucci isn't entirely sure how he made it so far into the new world without a crew, but this is hardly important, as unless he steps in now, his pair of small fries will go belly up. As the two pirates are led up to the gallows, Krieg remains silent, perhaps trying to create an aura of dignity in his final moments, while Arlong is his polar opposite, hurling anti-human rhetoric at any who will hear him, as if he thinks his bleeding will actually have any meaning after he's dead. Having no time to spare, Lucci strides towards the gallows, Hattori on his shoulder, and this draws the notice of the Marines guarding the prisoners, with 4 officers attempting to apprehend the Cypherpole traitor. For their effort, they promptly become a quartet of hole-filled corpses. And as Lucci used his Tempest Kick to cut their nooses, even Arlong is now left speechless. Knowing that more Marines will come soon, and not wanting to draw excess attention, Lucci next uses Shade to escape with the weaker pirates, zipping the 3 of them into a nearby alley, where they can speak in private. Eyeing the pair of former captains coldly, Lucci briefly introduces himself, before informing them that what just happened was not an act of kindness, but rather pragmatism, as he believes they will be useful as part of his crew. That reason, and that reason alone, is why he saved them from the gallows, and unless he continues to see value in them, he will not hesitate to dispose of them personally. Looking like a shell of his former self, Krieg nods, putting up no fight at all, while Arlong, still as feisty as ever, vehemently refuses, resuming his tirade from the execution platform, as he declares that he will not be subservient to some inferior human. Throughout his speech, Lucci says nothing, simply eyeing the fishman with his unblinking gaze. Then when Arlong is done, Lucci casually raises a hand, taking hold of Arlong's barbed nose and breaking it with the slightest of ease. Letting out a howl of pain, Arlong drops to his knees and attempts to reset his nose, which is now jutting out at a right angle, while in a brusque businesslike voice, Lucci tells him to stop talking and start listening. The three of them will be heading to Wano country tonight, a land of samurai, and more importantly, treachery, as it is under the thumb of the Yonko Kaido. While there, Arlong and Krieg's job will be to serve as his eyes and ears, since weak as they are, they have the advantage of being beneath the notice of the Beast Pirates. Something in this insult seems to stir a flame in Krieg's eyes, but wisely, he stays quiet, while Arlong is simply in too much pain to speak, allowing Lucci to continue uninterrupted. Still in that professional tone, he adds that because of that weakness, he expects them to train their hardest while on Wano, since once they leave that isolated island, they will have another mission, one even more dangerous than playing guest to a Yonko. However, that is not their concern for the time being. All that matters is that they do as he has said, since if they don't, all three of them will meet a fate far crueler than any marine executioner could dole out in the lair of the King of the Beasts. And this is where we'll be leaving the story off for right now. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed, and that is kind of becoming clear what I meant when I said this story is going to kind of take a little bit before I can start really doing some meaningful things with it. So now you can kind of see that happening, like Lucci's off in the world and doing more things and getting new allies and running into different little situations, and it's really fun. This is going to be a weird thing because like we have a few things that aren't really confirmed or denied just yet. So I believe we've seen Gin in the time skip. I'm not sure if we've seen Krieg yet. Same goes for Arlong. He might be dead. He might be an impel down. Avaro Pizarro might have eaten him so they can set up a cool fight with him and Jinbei sometime later down the line. We don't really know just yet. But I do think they're pretty perfect members for Lucci's crew because they've also had run-ins with Straw Hats, yes, but they also are very adept at killing and just kind of bloodshed, which is something I feel like has to be a prerequisite for Lucci to recognize you as being worthy of his crew and his kind of tutelage and, you know, flying the same banner as him. But as always, if there's some little piece of One Piece knowledge that I'm missing that you might have that can help me fill in a blank in the story that I might have messed up or made a mistake on, please do help and reach out. I really do look forward to telling the next parts of this story and kind of closing it up, because we're gonna have the time skip really soon, and then the big kind of missions for the CP9 crew, and then inevitably their reunion with the Straw Hat crew, because that obviously has to happen. So I'm super excited for this story. Hope you guys are as well. And I'm going to be really excited because now that the time skip is coming up, I also have an excuse to get more art done for this series, which I am so excited for. So if you want to be a part of that, please make sure you're supporting the channel any way you can through like liking the videos, recapping when new parts are coming out, staying up to date with community tab, making sure you're subscribed, and you can also become a channel member or a patron who are the biggest supporters of the channel, who I'm going to go ahead and do my shoutouts for now. Dominique, Pizza15X, Aaron Winters, Normandy1998, Shao Pai, Coder SV3, Ronan Charizard, Daniel Smith, Drax, Dylan Wolfdog31, Infernate Beast 326, Jay Ray, Johnny, Narku, Omar Cousin, Snow Slash Memes and More, Stephen Norton, Taryn, The Shadows, Vegeta What Ifs, Alamancer, Blood Down, Lyman Rogers, Omar Muhammad, Akko, Tay, Inebriated, John Sullivan, Trent Rouse, Dark Shadows, Pokemon Trainer Cam, River Joy, Elijah Edwards, Mr. Hamtastic, Jesus is King, Angel Gonzalez, David Spalding, Lil T910, Flyer B, Joseph Lau, Blaze 9526, Trainer Rad 164, Luca Reynolds, Baron Stormblade, Panda Walk 301, Ono, Chris Macariano, Lily, Simrov, Red Violet, DeAndre, and Gerald Smith. As always, your direct support of the channel means a ton and enables me to do a lot of stuff like I was just talking about, so please do keep it up, and thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. With that said, please be sure to take care of yourselves and the world around you. Happy Pride Month, and as always, go beyond plus ultra. And I'll see you guys next time.